Yo, what's going on, world? What's going on, Facebook? Everybody watching this live right now on listenvisionlive.com. All of our Instagram followers, Twitter. What's good? It's the Nitty Gritty Show. It's your boy, Jay DeCosta.
It's your girl, Katniss.
I'm the one and only Tay Jordan.
And together we are the Nitty Gritty. Look, we are very excited today. We have a great guest in the building today. We have Pastor Robert W. Lee IV. In case you guys don't know who he is also the distant nephew of Confederate General Robert E. Lee. But some more about Robert. He obtained his Bachelor's of Religious Studies from Appalachian State, a Master's of Theological Studies from Duke, and also is a professor now at Appalachian State there in North Carolina, teaching religious studies and public speaking. And recently resigned from the Bethany United Church at Winston-Salem. Some of you may know him from his appearance on the VMAs when he introduced Heather's mother on there to talk about just some of the things she was fighting for and the violence there in Charlotte, and just something that we see as a trend going across the United States. He's also been recently featured on the Roland Martin Show, The View, and Morning Joe there on MSNBC. So we're happy to have him here on the Nitty Gritty Show today.
Welcome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, happy to have you on, just to talk about just, those allied voices that we have in this fight towards social injustice and civil rights for all, and just trying to put a lid on some of the hate and stuff that we see going on. It is nice to have you speak out and do what you're doing. We really do appreciate that. And but of course, before we get into that, we always do a couple of quick segments. We always ask, how was your week? We'll start with Tay. How was your week, boo?
Oh man, my week was cool as always. I'm blessed. Just getting back. I'm about a week back now from being out the country, and I'm just trying to get over my cold. So I still got a little cough, but I had a pretty good week. I can't complain. So
That's what's
it's
up.
a few great articles up on the Black Juice Not right now. My political correspondent Corey Lancaster just posted a really good article as an update about Flint, their water crisis.
Mm-hmm.
So you guys should definitely check that out. And yeah, it's theblackjuice.com.
That's what's up. Rob, how was your week, sir?
Well, I've been quite busy. I preached at 3 churches this weekend, which is a new record for me.
Wow.
But it was a good experience, and I'm really tired, but I'm really happy to be here.
We're so happy to have you on.
Definitely.
We really
Thank
are.
you. Thank you.
Katniss, how was your week?
My week was good. I just came home. As you guys can see, I'm repping my Cleveland gear.
Yeah,
We are
Winnidins.
Central Division champs. Go Indians.
That's what's up.
Hometown pride.
Yeah, and I saw my family, so I'm feeling really good.
That's what's up. And of course, me, Jay DeCosta. I'm the man in these streets. Always having a good week. This week was busy, though. A lot of new technology came out. So, of course, I'm at the foreground with a lot of that stuff when it happened. So, yeah, it was a busy week as far as work was concerned. And then this has been a great week. We got some special announcements coming up for the Nitty Gritty Show. We're going to be broadcasting. And speaking of Flint, we're going to be broadcasting there real soon.
Yeah,
so
yes, sir.
more to come on that.
Growing and expanding.
Yeah, growing and expanding. So it's been a great week. I can't complain, and even if I did, who would want to listen anyways, right?
What's the point of complaining?
Yeah, there's just no point to it. But I will give it to hell with. And to hell with this week. And actually, it's really sad, though, seriously. But Jason Shockley, St. Louis officer, not being convicted of murder is really crazy. For those who have been following the story, he was found, and they even have the video of the unauthorized AK-47 that he was carrying, chased down and killed Anthony Lamar Smith. Only his DNA was found on the weapon that he claimed that was the reason that he pulled out on him in the first place. They said he was, carrying a concealed weapon, but there's no DNA from Anthony on that weapon. And then also, there's videos of him saying some pretty derogatory things about how he wanted to kill him, So, the fact that they couldn't find a conviction there, and then with all what went on previously in St. Louis, with the Mike Brown situation, and to see that revisited not too far away, because Ferguson is close, is just we definitely got to put it into it, and we have to make an example of people who don't obey the law, and then if those people are supposed to be lawmen and they break the law, they still have to fall to the same code. So they shouldn't be protected by what we call the blue shield. So
It's like, who's policing the police?
Yeah, and so something's definitely got to change there. It has to. But on a positive note, I like to always bring up blessings too. This one, I wanted to keep it simple. Shout out to Cardi B. If you know, like, and I'm not a real like big rap person, you know, but like definitely like I think something that brought up on the Breakfast Club, and this was reason why her song is number two on the Billboard Hot 100 right now. Like there's overall, and if she makes number one, if her streams continue, she'll be the first female rapper since Lauryn Hill to actually hit the number one spot. She'll beat out Taylor Swift.
Wow.
So there's been a lot of hashtag Cardi B for the culture.
Yeah.
So if you see that, like, yeah, you know, stream it. If that's what you like the Bodak Yellow, and maybe if you're working out, yeah, you know, stream it. You know, help Cardi hit
I feel
number
like
one.
even if you don't like rap, that song, like that beat,
It's
just
catchy.
like, yeah, it's
I'll work
really
out to it.
catchy.
I'll run to it. Yeah, you know,
Yeah.
I can knock out a couple of push-ups to that one.
And you
so.
know, it's like it's a hot record when like even guys be like,
True.
Yeah. I don't know all the words, but I know she says blooding shoes
and
in
I'm
there.
not sure exactly what she means.
I don't know what a
But
Bodak. Yeah,
I
but
definitely do, you know, vibe to it. I'm like, when I heard at the wedding last night, you know, everybody was, hey.
it's
So,
catchy. You gotta admit it's catchy. But then also a couple of birthday shout outs. Gotta shout out my brothers, my younger big brothers, because they're huge. Blessings of Richard and Nathaniel Altar celebrating their 30th birthday, Dirty 30.
Woo.
This just yesterday, September 16th. So shout out to them. And then also we have a birthday in the building. Just celebrated this past Thursday on the 14th. Robert Lee
Happy
turning
birthday.
25.
Thank
the
you.
big 2-5.
Hey, and that's impressive because you're 25. You already have your master's degree. You're already a professor at a school. I mean, teaching 2 courses. That's
4 actually.
Oh, yeah.
It's crazy. It's crazy right now in my life.
You got the
But
juice.
it's good.
Yeah.
You know, I'm 25. Might as well enjoy it. You know?
already made it to the VMAs. You didn't have to drop one album not at all. That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, like, we have a lot to be excited for, and you know, talking about you being here, you know, one thing we wanted to talk about, like, and I bring this up a lot on the show. You know, we have to have allies in the white community, and you speaking out, you were able to, you know, bring that to the forefront. And unfortunately, with like Heather's death, but I mean, these are the things that America needs to see. They need to see that, hey, you know, you don't have to be afraid to speak out if you're a person of the white community and you see things that are not going well. I think you're making it easier for people to speak out. And for those that, you know, still, you've been living in a rock somewhere and you don't know who Pastor Lee is, I have a quick video we're going to play. They did a quick report and just talking about what you did in the VMAs and all of that and just kind of like what's going on. So can you roll that for me, Jay?
Last night's VMA theme was love, unity, anti-racism, and frankly, anti-Trump. Throughout the entire night, there were more than a few subtle yet brilliant jabs directed to the president. Some even used their platform to speak out against racism and bigotry, something Trump seems to struggle with. In fact, Reverend Robert Wright Lee IV, the many times removed nephew of Robert E. Lee, came to the VMA stage to condemn the hatred and racism his great uncle once fought to preserve.
We have made my ancestor an idol of white supremacy, racism, and hate. As a pastor, it is my moral duty to speak out against racism, America's original sin. Today, I call on all of us with privilege and power to answer God's call to confront racism and white supremacy head on.
Reverend Lee also introduced Susan Bro, the mother of the late Heather Heyer, who was killed in Charlottesville when a white supremacist protesting the removal of Robert E. Lee's statue drove a car into a crowd of counter-protesters.
Thank you. I love you guys too. Only 15 days ago, my daughter Heather was killed as she protested racism. I miss her, but I know she's here tonight.
Bro went on to announce the launch of a brand new nonprofit scholarship fund, the Heather Heyer Foundation, to help more people join Heather's fight against racism, hatred, and social injustice.
Please visit our website to help me make Heather's death count.
And that moment was just the cherry on top of the entire VMA's subtle resistant movement. Because having Robert Lee and Susan Bro both on the stage at the same time showed exactly where the entertainment industry stands in the fight against inequality and Donald Trump. I'm Valeria Sistrunk, and for all the latest updates on politics and more, visit content.news.
Thank you, Content News. Pull one of their clips. They have some good stuff that they put out there too, so I wanted to pull that clip. And it was actually a good clip. But on to the nitty gritty of it all. Definitely happy to have you on. And I guess if I could kick off the first question,
Okay.
What made you speak out? I think a lot of people know you from the VMA speaking out, but when was the first time that you actually spoke out?
Well, the first time I really engaged with this on a public level was after the Mother Emanuel shootings, and I had an op-ed in the Washington Post about, as a Lee, it's hard to be silent when your ancestor has been made into an idol of white supremacy.
Mm-hmm.
And I just could no longer sit by and be silent. It's easy for white people, I think, to sit by and be silent. As you mentioned before, it's easy for us to sink back into our white skins and be comfortable there. But the God I know has called us to be a deeper, more prevalent, more prominent ally in this conversation. And so that's what I'm really seeking to do, is to be an ally, to listen more, to center other voices, to hear about the America that I didn't know growing up, but I know now is there and is present.
Wow.
You mentioned that growing up as a Lee, it was difficult and you really not an option to maintain silence. So as a child growing up as a Lee, obviously you're familiar with your family background. What did you feel applied pressure with just from your namesake and who your uncle is, and from other family members? Did they decide to take a more of a silent route? And what made you, I guess, take on that responsibility to actually, I'm going to say something. I'm kind of going to.
Well, I think my parents always taught me right from wrong. They always taught me that there was a right way to do things and a wrong way to do things, and I think that many sides argument's BS, but that's between you and me and the radio show. But what we've learned is there's a right side of history, right? Mm-hmm. And so what happened for me as a pastor is I see the intersection between policy and the pulpit, between politics and the pulpit, between engaging in anti-racism acts and the pulpit. Some people would disagree with me on that, but I see that there is a deep intersection there, one that we must connect each other with, both in the white church and in the black church. And if it's through those conversations that we see a deeper understanding of who we are as people, who others are as people, and who God created us to be.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Dr. King once said that the most segregated hour in the week is on Sunday morning. With that being said, and knowing the position that he had in social activism, how important is it for churches and clergy to be involved in politics? As we know, your pastor tends to be, have this hierarchy of leadership role. How important is it? Do you think it's something that all pastors should speak out against, or do you think it should primarily be focused on people who are not of, people of color?
Well, there's this prophetic edge, right, that we all have, that preachers all have anyway. And at Duke Divinity School, where I went to school, we had a class called the Most Segregated Hour for Black Church Studies credit, where students would have to take that class. And I find it interesting that we argue over the Most Segregated Hour. It's obvious it's Sunday morning. You walk into any church anywhere, and you see that there isn't such a thing as a multi-ethnic church, as much as they like to claim to be. That's very hard to find. What you find is people kind of siloing themselves off into areas where they feel comfortable. I think all pastors have a responsibility to reach across whatever chasm there might be and engage in a conversation that leads to wholeness and to healing.
Yeah.
You mentioned that it's an intersectionality between church and state and policy. Why do you think some people don't? Because to you and I, probably all of us, it's quite obvious. But why do you think to others it's like, there should be separation and don't really get involved?
I mean, I think the simple answer, especially for white people, is white privilege, right? Mm-hmm. We can go to church and hear a sermon that makes us feel good about ourselves, and gosh, we can get to lunch on time, and that makes us feel great, and we're engaged in that, and we feel good, and we go off on our merry ways. But the reality is, for so many people, Sunday morning is a time of engagement with those issues. Mm-hmm. We have to engage with those issues if we want to be the church and if we want to do church right. Because if we're ultimately just talking about the good things and not about the, like you said, the blessings and the to hell with it, if we're not talking about to the hell with it, then we're not having a real conversation.
Mm-hmm.
We're
like
not
that.
condemning racism as a sin. I mean, I would be curious to hear from your listeners how many of them have heard racism in white churches named as sin. And the reality is they probably haven't heard it named like that. But we have to give it that name, give it that label, and then seek atonement for it.
Yeah, because that's interesting. Like you see, I grew up in a Pentecostal apostolic background, and one of the organizations that we were affiliated with at one point, we seen a lot of racism within that church. So, these are people who are saying that, like they believe in the power of God and God is love. And, but you go to these churches where clearly, people are dealing with, racism issues. And all through Luke, you see Jesus actually speaking out against the Pharisees for their form of racism that they had towards the Gentiles and people who felt like they weren't the chosen people. So with that said, do you feel like there are voices that encourage, maybe from the pulpit in some places?
Oh gosh, yes.
Yeah.
I think of Amy Butler at the Riverside Church in New York City.
Mm-hmm.
I think of countless other examples in my life of priests and ministers and rabbis who are engaging in this conversation. But I think we have to engage in that and realize that there is a religious elite that is not willing to talk about racism, that's not willing to engage in racism, that will kick you out of your church if you talk about racism. And if we're willing to say to those Pharisees today, I know a God who's bigger than that, then we see a different way out and a different way forward together, that is.
Wow.
Do you think that people don't want to speak out about it because it makes them uncomfortable? Are they fearful? And if they are fearful, what repercussions have been posed as to why people don't want to speak out about it?
Well, I think it's inherently dangerous to speak out against racism in the white church, because the white people pay the paychecks that get you your money to make your money as a pastor, and that's unfortunately the way it is. I mean, it's bad for business to talk about issues that people don't want to talk about. But I've never been one to shy away from that.
Wow.
Because the God I know doesn't shy away from us.
Yeah.
In all of our messiness. So if we can't confront the mess in our world, then we're doing church wrong, and we need to think about why we even come on Sundays. Is it because it's a country club for the saints, or is it because it's a hospital for sinners?
This is good.
If it's going to be a place that is the country club, then call it what it is. Call it a non-government organization, get your tax-exempt status, and have a feel-good message. But if you want it to be a hospital for sinners, then you have to engage this dialogue about racism, about white privilege, and about white supremacy.
Mm-hmm. I definitely... Tay, did you have a question? Sorry.
Well, yeah, I was just going to ask... Jim Wallace has a book about original sin, and he names racism as America's original sin. Being that... I guess my question to you as a man of the cloth, do you think that more pastors have to take a responsibility to calling it by its name? We asked the president to call it by its name, but in terms of evangelical leaders, what is their responsibility to calling it by its name and actually dealing with its mess? Because if you don't call it by its name and deal with it, it's not like it's going to go away. So do you think that not enough of them assume the responsibility and they deny the responsibility, or is that like a sin that's just like, well, we're not going to acknowledge that one doesn't count, we're still going to get to heaven if we don't? I guess I'm just trying to understand the mindset with white Christians.
I think I call that the sin of complicity. Jim Wallace is a great example of naming it for what it is in his book, America's Original Sin, and I just have such respect for Jim and what he does at Sojourners, and I think the world of him. He's reached out to me lately through all of this, but I think the problem with evangelicalism and engaging evangelical thought is that the evangelical church, biggie, meaning the conservative white church, has gotten in bed with our elected leaders right now. And that's a dangerous, dangerous game to play. I confess as a pastor, I like President Obama, but I never once endorsed him from my pulpit. And yet we have some leaders who are at the White House all the time with our current president who are saying he's God's chosen man who builds walls, and it just makes no sense to me. why would you get in bed with the politicians when you're trying to engage in policy? You know, that's not the way to do it. That's not the way to change it. You change it with your voice. You change it with your with your mouth, with your movement, with your body, right?
Yeah.
So,
you don't engage with the politicians who are just as bad as the Pharisees.
it's a conflict, right?
It's a conflict. It's a conflict.
So do you think that's where the line should be drawn for men of the cloth and leaders of the church? Like, you don't get in bed with the politicians. You don't endorse from the pulpit. Is that
Yeah,
where you
I mean, we've got to consider what that means, right? There has to be a separation. But the separation does not mean that we can't engage in policy,
Sure.
that we can't engage in politics. It's just that when it comes to politicians, we have to be careful how we engage with them,
It's a
because
slippery slope.
because once we engage with them, it says a lot about who we are. You know, it says a lot about some of the pastors from various areas who are engaging with our current president. It says a lot about them, where their values lie. They don't lie with the persons of color. They don't lie with the African American community.
Wow.
So
It's a racist statement, because he's surrounded himself with people like Attorney General Jeff Sessions,
Yeah.
like Steve Bannon, that have engaged in such a conversation of racism that it's obvious to me where he stands.
he endorses it. Like,
So,
you can't
so I
disconnect.
don't know why churches are so quick to engage with him. Actually, I do know why, but I better not say it on air. It involves racism, just to let you know.
Respect it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's crazy. That was actually one of the questions I had, and I'm happy that Tay, you brought that up. But yeah, growing up, and I was a military brat, so we always lived in the South, and what we would see is, you know, it was always, oh, the Democrats are evil. Every time a Democratic president was coming up, that person was the Antichrist, right? And then whenever it's a Republican president, this is God's chosen. But I always asked the question, even as a kid, like, well, how is the Republican Bush, and I actually voted for Bush second time around. I was actually old enough too, but I just felt like, yeah, I just
We
said
won't
that on
hold that
air.
against you.
Yeah, I
You might
did,
want to
but
keep that to yourself.
Yeah.
I did, because I mean, versus Kerry at the time, and I was, you know, going into the military. I was like, you know, I don't know if we should just change up things. Even Obama, one thing I liked about Obama, he spoke out against the war, but once he got in office, he realized, I just can't change up what the military is going to do. And once you're there, and when I was there seeing that, I was like, I could roll with that. But anyways, don't hold the Bush thing against me. That's a conversation for another day. But anyways, you know, one thing I always seen was that conversation, and I never understood that, because I was like, you know what, Bush is not no Christian. I wouldn't vote. I didn't vote for him from a Christian perspective at all, because he wasn't a Christian in my eyes. He was no more Christian than what you would call Clinton Christian, as far as like all the stuff he did in office. Like, there was nothing about their lifestyle that you would say, oh, this is an upstanding Christian. I don't know if there's been too many politicians we could say that about. Probably the closest example of someone really having the decorum and the lifestyle of what we would want to see out of a Christian has probably been Obama in the last,
Isn't that crazy?
30 years, 40 years possibly even?
But he was a Muslim, right? You know, that's what they said about him.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
engaged
He
him
like,
and said he was a Muslim, and thought that it's bad to be a Muslim or to be of the Islamic faith, but that's what they got wrong, right? In politics, we are quick to engage with someone by saying, oh, let's label him the Antichrist, or let's label him the Savior, or her the Antichrist, as some people did with Hillary Rodham Clinton. And I think that the conversation has to shift from what they're doing with policy. What are their stances on policy? That's what shows Christian values ultimately. It has nothing to do with whether they say they're a Christian or not. What shows me who is a Christian is how they engage with these issues about black and brown bodies, how they engage with these issues about military might, and how we are going to respond to people. You know, Donald Trump tweeted today about Rocket Man, or was that yesterday? He called Kim Jong-un a Rocket Man. That's not engaging. That's like what your policy says a lot about your faith. And it seems to me that a lot of our politicians and their policies are not backing up their faith.
Yeah, I have a question. It seems as though down in that Bible Belt that things are possibly learned behaviors. I'm curious to know if you could speak more about, you know, being in that Bible Belt, why it is you think people teach these kind of practices and they indoctrinate it from the time that they're born until growing up. Is it because they don't have exposure, like a big city like DC, whereas there's all types of people here where we have the ability to kind of debunk, stigmatisms or things that we feel as though are false narratives of people. We have the ability to interact. Do you think that maybe that
the
could
internet, but
do you think that could be a part of why people, have these learned behaviors and don't want to change, possibly?
Well, my friend Molly is in the studio with me, and we went to high school.
Hey, Molly.
Hey, Molly. We went to high school together, and we went to an inner city school in Statesville, North Carolina. Statesville has, not that many people in it. It has a Walmart, and we go to Walmart to hang out. But that's about it.
That's all over the South.
It's not Washington, D.C., right? But we went to an inner city school, so we were the minority as white people.
Oh, wow.
So I don't think it's an issue of being exposed to it. I think it's an issue of just racism, of just calling it what it is and saying, gosh, these people are racist and they are backwards and they need to be changed.
Do you think it's also an issue of not being able to disconnect from a case of what's said to be white privilege? Do you think a lot of that could be what the issue is as well, as terms of like speaking out for injustices? It's like, well, I'm not really impacted by it directly, and so what really is it for me to personally gain if I speak out against it?
Well, gosh, I think white privilege and white supremacy is just as much as a sin as racism, because they go hand in hand. So for me to engage in white privilege and to walk in here into this studio and to automatically make assumptions about you because you're a person of color is me engaging in sin. I really believe that, and I'm not going to stop until people start to hear me on that issue.
Do people fight you on that, like when you share that?
Oh, yes. White people don't want to hear this, and I'm one of them. I don't want to hear it either. I don't want to hear that I'm privileged. Because the second I hear that I'm privileged, I have to then engage in fixing that, in atoning for that, and saying I'm sorry for that. And no one likes to say they're sorry. No one likes to atone. No one likes to fix it. Because it's easy. It's easy to sink back into the white skin and say nothing's wrong.
That's true. And I guess that comes with a lot of... Do you think it's likely then for, the massive of white people to actually speak out then, because this is something that can be, detrimental to themselves?
Gosh, I think it's possible, and I hope it will. I hope it will take root. We're going to have to engage as white people in a conversation with what I call Trump's America, about what it means to be white. The people who are allies are going to have to stand up and stick up to our cousins, to our aunts, to our uncles,
I agree,
to our parents, to our grandparents, to whoever's the racist one in the family, and say, look, this is enough is enough. We're going to have to go to Thanksgiving. We go to Thanksgiving dinner and we say, I'm just not going to say anything, to my uncle, right? We're just not going to say anything.
Nice.
Well, maybe it's time to speak up at Thanksgiving about the racism, about the pervasive racism that is subversive, that is getting into our culture. I mean, our Thanksgiving's very nice because my mom looks at me and she says, don't say a word. And then someone will make a racist comment and I'm gone. I'm like, I'm out the door.
Mom already know you're going
Mom knows I'm going to do that. I love my mom to death, but she knows she's ready for it, right?
Like, this is going to tick him off.
Yeah, this is going to get you.
And I'm happy that came up because that was actually another question I had is do we correct in private, right? So, a lot of times I think the issue lies in those private conversations. It's one thing when maybe a handful might post on Facebook or Instagram, but it's another thing when you have to speak out against
at the
dinner table with that
when you've
uncle,
got
with
family
the aunt.
involved.
Yeah,
I mean that's dangerous.
What do you do? And the same, and this works on so many levels. Whether it's guys and the disrespecting of women, right? Who's going to be that guy in the crowd that says, "Hey, man, don't use the B word when describing a woman," or do you have to be so derogatory of how you describe them, right? So the same thing in racism, having that voice. So I mean, speaking out in private. I think that's really important.
I think that's important too. My question would be, when you do speak out in private and you take that responsibility on head on, is it encouraged to be suppressed by family and those close to you and friends? Is it, do you feel the weight on the world on your shoulder to when you do stick up for racial equality? Is it my uncle's gonna hate me for this, or my aunt's not gonna like this, or I might be disowned? I guess my question is, do you feel that pressure on your back when you do actually make the conscious decision? You know what? This is wrong. I'm actually going to say something.
In the past few weeks, I've lost a lot of respect for people who don't speak up. and I'm not going to lose respect for myself.
Yeah.
So that means speaking up and speaking out in ways that are healthy, in ways that don't.
That's a respectful.
Yeah, there's a
respectful thing that
respectful
you
way
do,
to do that,
yeah.
you know. But you still got to speak up, and they can hate you for it. I've got a lot of people who hate me. You should see my Twitter feed.
I can only imagine.
You should see the white folk and even the persons of color who are engaged in this and don't want to stir the pot, right? And so we have to say, as people who are willing to affect change, that some people aren't going to like us. Some people are going to threaten us. Some people are going to, but change is a scary word. And we have to engage in it and say we are going to change this world if it's the last thing that we do.
Yeah.
But with change, I'm curious to know your thought process. Tim Wise talks a lot about this, but what do you think happens to the church if they were to really start talking about change, whereas we idolize a white Jesus, even though we know Jesus was born in the Middle East and he is a man of color? What does that really mean? What does that mean for minorities? I think just over the years, it seems as though, European culture has been indoctrinated to all cultures around the world, and people feel like that is the standard. So does change require that the standard and the model then changes?
Well, you ask a good question there, but it's not the last question you asked. I want to answer the second, the
very first.
Jesus as a minority.
Yes.
Jesus was a first century Palestinian Jew, and I think the thing that tells us is that Jesus stands in solidarity with the last and the least and the oppressed and the persons of color and the black and brown bodies on the street, the victims of capital punishment. Jesus was a victim of capital punishment. If you think about it, this Jesus fellow was not in solidarity with the white folks who sit in the pews and put on money in the offering plate. Jesus was in solidarity with the persons of color who were struggling to make 3 square meals a day. That's who Jesus was. And that's a Jesus that Dr. King espoused. That's a Jesus that Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson, all these people espouse about. That's a Jesus I can get behind. That's a Jesus I can support and engage with.
Now, how about, we talk a lot about resistance you receive from, whites. But how about the resistance with people of color, right? Because, and it's sad, right? We talk about this a lot on the show. It's like we can't talk down white allies. If you have the same goal and you want the same peace, because the end of the day is, saying I'm black and I'm proud doesn't mean I'm black and I'm better. It's just saying, like, look, I'm proud of being black. We live in a world
that's what the fear is, though.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate that it's misconstrued as that, but.
So, have you been met with a lot of resistance or some resistance even from people of color?
Yeah.
Because you're speaking out on something that actually benefits them?
Well, I want to be careful with this, right? I don't want to offend anybody, but I think that's part of the issue is we have engaged in a culture where we are so politically correct that we can't have a conversation.
That's right.
I almost want to say to people, let's just take our jackets off, let's sit down, let's have a meal. You tell me about how you experience America, I'm going to be an active listener. And then I can tell you about how I experience America, and you can be an active listener.
Let's get down
there's
to the nitty-gritty.
There's the nitty-gritty, right? There's a breakdown, though, with some white people, with some persons of color who just simply don't want to engage in it. They want to have it their way or no way, and that's okay. But for me, the better way is for us to do this together as allies on a mission.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I agree. What does theology say about, calling it by its name in racism? What does, the church say about turning it back and denying racism?
Well, the church says a lot, but I think theologically, I look to it this way. God brought the Israelites out of Egypt through the sea. Jesus called Lazarus out of the tomb. Those are deeply subversive acts. One against Pharaoh, the king of the country of Egypt, and one against death itself. Those two things are so subversive that they flip our world upside down so that it's actually right side up. And it's in that message that theology offers that God is a God of liberation, not of segregation, or not of degradation, or not of impoverishment, but engaging with the culture that is there, that is present, and then beginning to make it all new.
That's deep. That's a good point. Did you know, prior to your appearance on the VMAs, did you know, obviously you already knew what you were going to say, but why then, why now, why that moment?
You know, there's a line in the Old Testament in the Hebrew Bible that talks about Esther. Mordecai, Esther's cousin, comes to her and says, you know, maybe you've been given royal dignity for such a time as this. Mm-hmm. And I see that as a real reality, that I've been given this moment, this time on The View, this time on MSNBC, on NPR, for this. And if I can use my voice, because I do believe that there is a small subsection of the population that will only listen to a white guy named Robert Lee. And I think if they will listen for 2 seconds, I may piss them off. Yeah. But if they'll listen for 2 seconds, they might change their ways.
Do you think you've reached
and that's
some
worth
people
it. Oh, yes, people have reached out to me. I mean, gosh, my publicist is over there. And hey, Ori.
Hey, Ori.
I've got 2 friends in the studio tonight, and they came along. They were my entourage. And we've been looking at the tweets, and we've had atheists say, you know, gosh, if you were doing church this way, we'd come to your church.
Oh, wow, that's big.
Wow.
And that's not bashing atheism. That's just saying that they see this as a different way of doing church and a different way of engaging culture. And if we're willing to do that, then I think our pews would be a lot more full than they are now.
Yeah, that's reinforcing.
Well, yeah, I mean, historically, the problem with the church is we haven't really got away from that. How the Pharisees and the Sadducees kind of, you know, did church back then, and we allow it to always sit back into the culture. And you know, if you obviously you do religious studies, you know this stuff, right? But when you see it, you always see that systematic form of church. Even going back to the and nothing against, you know, Catholics, but looking at what the Catholic Church did from a political standpoint, to entrench themselves in the politics of whether it was France or Great Britain or whatever country they were trying to, you know, move and plot and maneuver. And definitely, you know, you talked about this earlier, but we have to get into a place where I think sometimes pastors and clergy of the cloth, I think they get so wrapped up into the name and like, oh, I know this, you know, politician and this senator, and oh, I was called to the White House to talk to this person. I think they get caught up to the prestige of what that is versus the mission of what it is. And I think the reason why so many people can be atheists now or just go out to all these different things, and like in Christianity, this doesn't look appetizing because we've rolled back to that point of like having this hierarchy in church, like, oh, the millionaire row, you sit in the front. You know, people have preferred parking at some churches where if you have a Mercedes, that's Mercedes row. These things exist in churches now. And I think people are disgusted by that because the original church that you seen Jesus like lead, they didn't have walls. They didn't have beautiful buildings that they went into. It was just people being filled with faith, and that faith came with hope, and it came with change. It wasn't just, hey, let me tell you a good story. It's like, hey, the life you live takes you on a road to death, but there's a better way when you subscribe and actually sacrifice some things you think you need, and you realize how much better you are when you cut them off.
Right.
I think if you read Scripture, it's very obvious where Jesus sides with. And, you know, even in the early church, if you read Acts, which I would challenge some of our listeners to do if they're really interested in this, the early church was deeply anti-capitalism, too. They shared everything with one another. And I'm not bashing capitalism for the sake of bashing capitalism. I'm just saying that we have broken systems. And we have to get back to basics, both in the church and in our politics and in our economics and how we engage in the world.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about your stance on, I know a lot of people get misconstrued and have a poor, misconception of what Black Lives Matter is, but you said something that really resonated with me in one of your interviews, and you actually wasn't one of the guys that spoke out against Black Lives Matter. What is your understanding of it, and what is it that, because I know a lot of people would say, well, you know, well, all lives matter, which all lives do matter, but not all lives are under attack, such as Black lives or brown lives as well, minority lives. What is your understanding of Black Lives Matters, and what do you think some of your peers and other white people, what their disdain for it is? Why do they think it's a hate group? Trump, our own president, called it a hate group. What is the disconnect or the misunderstanding with that?
The misunderstanding is that to say Black Lives Matter to some white people means that they will lose their power. Because the second you say Black Lives Matter, you are engaging in a different way of viewing the world than white Christians, which is a threat to everything we hold dear.
Wow.
It's a threat to our systems. It's a threat to everything. And so now maybe you can see why some people would be so threatened by it and call it a terrorist organization or a militant organization. I don't think it is. I don't think it's even an organization. I think it's just a statement being made that's become a movement. And so, I just wish that we could engage in such a way that would bring us to a fuller understanding of ourselves and of others. And we have to do that by saying Black Lives Matter. Unequivocally, Black Lives Matter.
I agree. Do white Christians, do they think that, obviously there's a difference between white supremacy and stuff like that, but do you think that white Christians actually think that racism is not a sin and like they're going to go to heaven and they can be racist and it's okay? Like, what is that offensive? Is that a sin that's so offensive that can, I guess, withhold them from getting into heaven, or do they not think that is it just natural order for them?
I think of it this way. I think some of our Christians are so heavenly minded that they do no earthly good. That's a quote from a theologian and thinker. But I think about that a lot. They're so heavenly minded that they do no earthly good. They're so quick to get into heaven that they forget that there's a black person on their stoop who needs food. They're so concerned about getting to church on time that they get mad at their cab driver who happens to be a person of color. This is what makes it subversive and wrong, because we've beaten racism so far down that it's gotten into our drinking water, and we're drinking it again.
Yeah. Do you think our generation is going to be the one to, I don't want to say fix this issue of racism, but do you think our generation is going to be the one to move it forward to at least a place of conversation?
God, I hope so. Because we're tired. We're all tired.
Yeah.
Regardless, I mean, like all of us who are at this table, I'm sure, are tired. I think of The Help when that lady says, "You must be so tired." Yeah, it's tiring to deal with racism.
Yeah.
You know what? I'm happy you said that, because I think a lot of us, just as being black people, we always wonder and we question, like, do some white people get tired of this as well? Like,
Oh, there are plenty of white people out there that are just as tired as I am of seeing this. I mean, for lack of a better word, shit happen. Like racism is awful, and we're not engaging in it in a way that is healthy, and it's so tiring.
And I don't think like people saying, "Oh, this is post-racial," and
oh no, it's not.
It's not gonna.
We're post-Charlottesville now, right? That's the way to look at it. There was a pre-Charlottesville when it wasn't in the front of us, and now it's post-Charlottesville and it's right in front of us, and we have a choice whether we're going to say something about it or not.
Or is there going to be another one?
Or is there going to be another one? Is it going to be Richmond next? Is it going to be Charlotte next? Is it going to be Raleigh next? What's the next Charlottesville? And that's what's scary. Is it Dallas? Where is it?
Yeah.
Where are we going to engage in this next? And whose life is going to be taken because of it?
Yeah, that's right.
Did you feel any awkwardness that Charlottesville was kind of centered around the statue, obviously that being a relative of yours? Did you feel any kind of awkwardness because, your name comes from this General Robert E. Lee? So
yeah.
I'm just wondering, how did that make you feel? Because on one hand, you have history and the legacy of your name, but on the other hand, you are fighting to move the culture forward and speak out against racism.
When I saw Susan Bro that night at the VMAs, she told me to never stop talking.
Okay.
And I'm thankful for her. I'm really thankful for her and for her witness. Because it would have been easy to say, well, this sucks, but I don't have to speak up. But I think what I've learned in all of this, in every situation I've faced since the VMAs, is that if I don't talk, someone else will. And I don't want that someone else to be a racist person.
That's a good point.
And if I don't center other voices like what we're doing here and having a real conversation about race and about equality and about white privilege and about white supremacy, someone else will. and it might be a racist person. And we don't want that.
We don't need to hear any more.
We don't need to hear any more of that. We need to hear a message that there is a different way.
Yeah.
There's a different way of engaging in this, and my hope is that we will begin to do that soon.
Yeah.
Do you think that the statues should all come down and be in the
Yes.
museum?
Unequivocally, yes.
Okay.
That's a good point.
And I think, and it goes a little bit even beyond the statues. We need to change how we teach history in America. We have a very limited history. I think one benefit I have is that my dad was born and raised in London. So growing up, me and my brothers, we always heard history from a different perspective. So I think it was broader. I think it was richer. And we don't have the privilege of having that in America. Like, our history is very limited, very shallow. And we definitely teach in parts. And I think it also, it has a change in the classroom,
Well, I don't know where you grew up, but down in the South, it's even worse.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's been in a lot of southern towns, Tennessee for a long time.
You know what it's like then. To hear history as the war of northern aggression.
Wow.
Or don't call it the Civil War, call it the war between the states. Because you want to emphasize the states' rights. We've all heard that.
Yeah.
It's that, again, it's so subversive that it's evil.
Were you surprised that a guy like Donald Trump got into office? And I guess my question also is, did many white Christians, from your standpoint, actually vote for him? And was that a conflict of faith, even, like, for a guy to, I guess, condone such hate? Like, I guess I'm just seeing a disconnect for, as a Christian, whether white or black, to condone.
Yeah, because a lot of black Christians in that South, that Bible Belt voted for him.
Yeah, so I guess my question is, like, is racism just this thing that's like, I guess people see it as a natural type of thing that's not a sin, but more of a state order, or this is just how things are. Me personally, I was surprised that we can go from 8 years of a black president, and people like to suggest that it's a post-racial society, and then for us to immediately go back into this.
Well, maybe that was the point, though. Maybe that was the point, that we went
Like,
so far forward that we've got to go back a little. I don't know. But to answer your question, I really appreciate strong women in my life. Of course, I've mentioned Molly here tonight, and my wife Stephanie.
Hey, Molly.
And when that came out, that Donald Trump said that sexually derogatory remark about that woman,
Yeah.
and I heard the revulsion in my friends who were women's voice, and I heard my wife cry the morning after the election, and I cried too, and I called my mom. I said, "How can this happen? That we can go so far back?" I think we're just now starting to see what it really means to go backwards.
Yeah.
And that's scary. But it doesn't mean it has to go back all the way. We've got 2018 coming, we've got 2020 coming, and we've got to engage in policy. Yeah. We've got to engage our leaders. We've got to love them. My mom asked me, well, if Donald Trump tweets at you, are you going to, tweet him back? Or are you going to call him back if he calls you? And I think I might.
Yeah.
Because I'd love to have a conversation with him and at least tell him how I feel. Because I really want him to know that there is such a thing as the Nitty Gritty Show that's discussing these issues in a healthy way.
Yeah, he definitely did.
You get what I'm saying, though. You guys are discussing race and violence and all this stuff in healthy ways, and he's obviously not. So how do we engage in that, and how do we begin that conversation?
We'll teach a seminar, a Nitty Gritty seminar.
Nitty Gritty seminar. There, we'll bring him into the White House, right? Yeah.
You hit it on the note when you said healthy ways, because I think a lot of times, depression is real, mental health is a real issue, racism is a real issue. Nobody really wants to talk about. You got to go and get healed from these things. People think you could just pray it away, as opposed to seeking actual, medical help.
That's true.
For these kind of things. These are like real intrinsic mental, issues. The fact that that young man thought it was okay to use a car and to literally ram it into a crowd. That to me is
it's deeply entrenched,
yes,
right?
It's really
and just to see Facebook and social media comments and people actually defended, like, well, she was there kind of protesting, starting mess, and it's like, wow, people are really cool out here. But
that doesn't justify death.
Yeah, I have one more question for you. I'm not sure if you're a football guy. I know you're a Blue Devil, But,
Yeah. Depends on football, what you're trying to go at there, but whatever. Yeah.
Well, no, so my question is, for Colin Kaepernick, you were a guy that used your platform with the VMAs, and he's a guy that is a football player, just not signed right now, but he used his platform. So when guys like yourself and Kaepernick do things and use your platform to speak out against, racial equality and injustice, I guess, were you surprised with the backlash? Did you know it was coming? And what is also your opinion on, some people say he's being blackballed. What is your opinion on Kaepernick and him using his platform and taking such a backlash?
Well, someone called me the theological Colin Kaepernick the other day because I'm, with all the backlash that I've received. But here's the deal. I had the opportunity. I was at Carborough High School the other day, talking to a group of high schoolers, and there was a white student who raised his hand and said, "I knelt with my fellow black students in high school." In honor and of what Colin Kaepernick is doing and in protest of what our nation has become. If a white boy from Carborough High School can do that, why can we not sign Colin Kaepernick?
Yeah.
Is it because he's become a walking controversy? If so, I can identify with that a little bit. But I also know that there's hope for him because he's ultimately taken a stand and stood for what's right. And he's engaging other people in different ways. And he may not have the signed on the dotted line, but he's made a difference. He's started a conversation.
Yeah.
And that's the thing with me, too. I may not have signed on the dotted line, but hopefully I've started a conversation.
Does that go back to your point when you mentioned earlier in the show that, speaking out could be bad for business? Like, is that what's happening to Colin Kaepernick? So is it, obviously we live in America, it's a capitalistic society. Are we really showing the people and the citizens of America that business is supreme when it comes to race relations and anything else? Basically business over humanity, over racial issues, over anything else, like business first.
That's crazy.
Right? When you really put it into perspective, that's
definitely.
essentially what we're saying, right?
Yeah. The economics platform is what won Donald Trump the election, I'm convinced. Because he scared people enough into having that conversation about economics, right?
Yeah.
And make America great again. Well, what are we talking about? What year?
Is that me maybe a slave again?
What year? Were we talking about like 1950s Jim Crow when the economy was good, but black people were secondary citizens? Is that what we're talking about? 3/5? Are we going to go back even further? What does that mean? I think like these are the questions that we have to ask ourselves and our society and engage in. Is the dollar more important than a black body?
This is
questions that need answers.
Yeah.
And and I feel like, because we're about to run out of time. I know Jay's been mentioning me, but I think that's a good point to leave on. Are these green dollars more important than these black bodies? And definitely, I want to have our listeners continue the conversation. If you guys have questions, if you have thoughts, can you tell them where they can follow you at if they want to reach out to you?
I'm on Twitter at RobLee4, ROBLEE 4.
All right. And any final thoughts that you would like to give to everyone before we sign off?
Well, I'm just so thankful to have had the opportunity to talk with you guys. It's so great. So
Yeah,
thank
well,
you so much.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Wonderful.
This has been a great show. Tay, can you tell them where they can find us?
Yeah, so definitely you guys can follow us at Twitter at TBJ_Nitty Gritty. Also like our Facebook page at the Nitty Gritty Show. And of course we're on Instagram as well at the Nitty Gritty Show. And make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel at the Nitty Gritty Show on YouTube.
Yeah, and of course, don't forget we have the mugs, we have shirts. We're gonna have a nice little link coming out.
Enthusiasm with that. Like, we got
Look,
mugs,
I'll do it. We have these wonderful mugs. As you can see, 2 different designs. They'll be on sale as well as our Nitty Gritty Show shirts, any color that you like. We're gonna have a link for you. Check us out on the Facebook page.
Yep. So remember, and when you support that, that helps us, pay the bills around here, keep the publication going. That's how all this good stuff, all the aesthetics, all the good content we have. So we definitely appreciate our subscribership and our followership, and of course you're gonna be seeing us in more markets here soon. But hey, It's your boy Jay DeCosta.
It's your girl Katniss.
And I'm the one and only Tay Jordan.
Together we are
The Nitty Gritty.
And Rob, thanks for coming on again.
Yes, we appreciate it.
So happy to have you on. Everyone watching us, hey, don't forget to hit us up in conversation. Hey, this has been the Nitty Gritty Show, and we are out.
Ow.
Have fun. Be safe.